All right, in this study I want to wrap up our look at rebellion, and so we can move on to something else. To sort of summarise how it can begin, I want to tell you a story of a number of years ago. I was working with a family and they had a daughter who was incredibly defiant and rebellious towards her father in particular, not the mother. And so as we kind of look at how it can begin, this particular family, I went to visit with them, and as I saw this behaviour from the daughter, I thought it was very strange, because the father was actually a lovely, gentle man who clearly loved his daughter a lot. But we can see how it can come out of a misunderstanding. And so the situation was the father worked every weekend because he really wanted to have enough money to provide very, very well for his family. And so as a consequence of that, he was never there for school events for the children and so forth. And so this daughter grew up thinking it wasn't fair. He doesn't care about me or what I want like the other dads do about their children. So it was actually a misunderstanding, but she perceived that as injustice and not fair, and clearly it wasn't something that was explained to her as she was growing up. So her misunderstanding made her come to the conclusion that the authority figure, in this case her father, should be rebelled against, and she was quite defiant. So you can see how it begins, and there were obviously some beliefs and things that needed to be dealt with there. All right, so as we move on, I just wanted to take a few moments to discuss autism and its link to rebellion that we've seen, just in the hope that it might help families understand what they're dealing with, and possibly add to what other ministers might know, so that together we have more on offer to help people to get set free. And I've only personally ministered to one autistic person who is now radically changed in terms of the behaviour that proceeded from the autism and other issues that they held. Now, at times and in certain situations there are some minor signs still in this person, but you need to know what you're looking at. But there's some signs of little residual tendency towards typical autistic behaviour, but in general they're quite transformed. So as I'm talking about this, I want to say I'm certainly not setting myself up as any kind of expert on autism, and I've not even studied autism at this point in any kind of detail as a condition. I've only ministered to it on one occasion in a Christian context, applying biblical principles. So as I say, just offering what we have to add to what others have in the hope that it will help. And this person I dealt with, it involved ministering over time to many of the emotional areas that we've been describing in these studies anyway, and you'll certainly begin to see how they're active in this case. So as we did this, we gradually eliminated the autistic behaviour, and the areas of dramatic change that we saw were rebellion disappearing, self-hatred, violence, withdrawal, anger, and insanity as an escape mechanism, which is generally a part of the problem, or dissociation as another way that we would know that or understand that. Now, in saying all of this largely happened through rebuilding the walls of the personality with materials such as acceptance, encouragement, fairness, godly control, remembering that this child was out of control, encouragement, security, and reframing the person's in question's boundaries. Now, I've had exposure to a number of other people suffering from autism in a general setting, and I want to say that in a number of those cases, I've noticed an observable spirit of rebellion in their fathers. And by this, I mean that their rebellion was demonic in nature, from a spirit inside, as opposed to the pressure to be rebellious from the outside of our beings that we all have, or all have had elements of. So at the same time, I've seen other cases where this is not obvious in either parent, but seems evident further up the family line. So I'm certainly not suggesting any kind of standardisation based on the few cases that I know of, but I simply offer what I have seen in case it helps anyone understand their own loved ones, or, as I say, helps others working in ministry in knowing what you're dealing with these things. I've also heard testimonies of autism symptoms improving and reducing just simply through the prayer of faith. So with God, anything is possible. But if that's not working, then you may need to deal with some of these roots, such as rebellion that we're talking about. Other Christian commentators have also observed the rebellion and self-rejection issues that are present with autism. And as we've previously pointed out when we were teaching about rejection, a result of rejection can be withdrawal as a countermeasure to extreme fear of rejection along with self-rejection. So at times the withdrawal from relationships is so extreme that the speech or ability and desire to communicate is also not functioning. So some consider this to be an inherited deaf and dumb spirit stemming from matriarchal control. Now they consider this ungodly order in the household to be actually the root cause of the problem. Now, I must admit, in addition to fathers with rebellion problems, I've certainly observed some controlling women and role reversal in the generation lines of children suffering with these problems. Again, I would be perhaps a little bit more hesitant than these others to standardise that, but certainly something to look for. Some report changes as these spiritual issues are dealt with, the role reversal in the home, and that it's dealt with and repented of. So, but what we could say is autism is one of many disorders that began to emerge after the family unit, from a biblical perspective, began to disintegrate. So you ask yourself, is it a question that we can point to is it a coincidence that we can point to the rapid escalation of autism following the removal of the Bible in the US in the early 1960s as being the standard of reference for how a household should run? Now this impacted the world significantly with the proliferation of media from the US and many other nations following this nation as a role model. For example, even today, certainly in the 60s, if there was riots in the US, you'd see riots all across the world. So many are following the US as a role model. So the problem is that rebellion against God's word and his instructions still holds a consequence for subsequent generations, just as it did in the Garden of Eden at the very beginning. Now, I'm old enough to have personally witnessed the changes commencing in the 1960s, where increasingly women don't work together in the leadership of the home, but instead they rule the household. So looking at this whole business of autism, one study indicated that in 1975 the incidence of autism was about 1 in 5,000 children. By 1985 it had become 1 in 2,500. By 1995 it was 1 in 500. By 2001, 1 in 250, and by 2012, 1 in 88. Now, I'm not sure what the statistics are now, but it's a very alarming change as the family unit is reframed according to humanistic principles. And let me just note that the term autism has been in use for around 100 years, and it reportedly comes from the Greek word autos, which means self. So it's kind of very much a strong picture of self on the throne, the old nature in the extreme. And so this then describes a state or condition where a person becomes an isolated self, withdrawn from social interaction. All right, so we'll leave that there. That was for whatever it's worth. Let's move on and let's put the whole subject of rebellion in summary. Okay, failure to provide love and acceptance, nurture, encouragement, and security leaves a void that the child feels that they need to provide for themselves. So we're not talking about autism now, although this may apply there as well, but we're talking about rebellion in general. Nearly all rebellion problems begin in childhood, and you can expect them to be networked with other negative emotional reactions stemming from heart beliefs, as we've said, like anger, bitterness, and pride and so forth. Ministering to rebellion, what do we need to do? Well, you'll need to go back and look for the origins of the rebellion that exist against authority figures and others, but it will usually be the parents, in particular the father. In the ministry session, we're looking for the feelings of injustice or unfairness that would be there. We're also being aware of statements emanating from inner beliefs, such as, for example, that's just the way it is for me, nobody ever cares, it's not fair, but it's just the way that it is. So now we see those injustice beliefs. So we have the person then focus on the feeling or the statement which connects them to a feeling that is replicated in the past. Having arrived at the earliest possible memory or impression, we have them focus on the feeling and identify the belief, or if they're more cognitive and have the belief first, they look at the situation and have them concentrate on the belief, allowing the matching feeling to emerge and come up. Remember, your role is to ask questions to help them identify that which they believe. So let's look at a sample rebellion session, and again we'll call our man Fred. All right, so me, I would say, okay, what seems to be bothering you, Fred? Fred responds, I've been struggling with angry feelings a bit lately when I come to church. I would say, so if you think about it, what exactly is it that's making you angry? So Fred pauses and he reflects and thinks about it for a moment. And then he says, I think it's because the leaders have never shown any interest in the groups that I'm starting around the church. I would say, okay, so how does that make you feel as you think that nobody is doing that for you? Fred thinks about it. He says, it's not fair. They don't care about what I'm doing. So then I say to him, why don't you think they care about what you're doing? Fred, again, reflection. Now he has some feelings coming up. He says, well, being honest, I think it's because I'm not very important. Okay, so then I ask Fred, I want you to concentrate on that thought that you're not important. It must be a sad feeling, so I want you to let yourself feel that feeling. And now I want you to let your mind connect you with other places where you felt exactly that way. So Fred again pauses for a moment. He says, you know, when you said that, I remembered when I was a small boy, all of the other kids were getting a special meal brought home and I wasn't allowed to have any. I was probably about 4 years old. And so I say to him, so as you look at that situation, why do you think that you were missing out? And Fred thinks about it. He says, well, I feel a bit angry. They don't care about what I want. And so then I say to him, so does not caring about what you want mean that they don't care about you? Fred says, yes, I'm not important. I don't matter and they don't care about me. Okay, Fred, I want you to concentrate on those feelings and see what the Lord has to say to you. It's His truth, which is the truth. Your truth is that they don't care about you and don't think you're important. Then we might pray, inviting God to communicate truth through the Spirit of truth to Fred. Now that we know that because of his situation, because he was missing out, everybody else was getting it, then nobody cared about him, so he wasn't important. Fred sits for a moment and he says, well, it just seems like my own thoughts, but it seemed like God said that I am important to him. And I just remembered that passage from 1 Peter 5:7 that says that he cares for me. So, and as I continue to think about it, the thoughts keep coming to my mind, and I've just remembered that I'd been sick at that time. And what I'm sensing is that even though they didn't explain it to me at the time, they didn't give me any of the food because I might throw up. So then I'll ask Fred, so are you important and cared about? Fred says, well, God thinks so. And apparently my parents cared enough and thought enough about me to not want to make me sick. All right. So now we want to test it. So Fred, I want you to look in your heart, not your head. Is that belief that you're not important still there? Fred, no. Which is strange because it's always been there, but I can't find it anymore. I am important and cared about. All right, so then I ask him, how do you feel about the leaders not paying attention to your groups now? And Fred ponders, thinks, well, to be honest, I guess I never have trusted them and let myself connect with them. I wanted them to take up my ideas, but I wasn't interested in working with theirs. So I suppose I just expected them to know how I felt, which was a bit unreasonable of me, I guess. Okay, so then I say to Fred, do you feel all right about approaching them now? Fred responds, yes, actually I feel a bit excited about what might be ahead for me now. Okay, so now that's a simple example, and for some people there may have been a number of beliefs and events that have to be worked through if a person has grown up in an abusive, unjust or unfair environment. May even be quite a lot. All right, so that finishes our study on rebellion, and when we return soon, we'll begin to discuss the principles of anger and what produces it. Okay, see you soon.